The surprise that destroyed my 28-year marriage. Had no idea that one simple decision would erase almost 3 decades of trust in less than 5 minutes. When I walked into my wife's office carrying her favorite coffee and a homemade lunch, I expected to surprise her with a small act of love. Instead, a security guard smiled at me, pointed toward another man, and casually said something that stopped my heart. That was the moment I realized the life I believed I was living might have been nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 56 years old, and for most of my life I believed I had built something almost impossible to find in this world. I believed I had a marriage built on loyalty, respect, and unconditional trust. My wife, Victoria Carter, and I had spent 28 years together. We had survived financial struggles, career changes, family losses, and every challenge life had placed in our path. At least that was what I believed until one Thursday afternoon completely rewrote my understanding of our entire relationship. Victoria was the chief executive officer of one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the city. She had earned every promotion through years of relentless dedication, long nights and sacrifices that affected both of us. I was proud of her success because every achievement she celebrated felt like something we had accomplished together. While she climbed the corporate ladder, I quietly managed my accounting practice, enjoying a simpler and more predictable life. I never cared about luxury or status. Seeing her smile when she reached another milestone was enough for me. Over the last 3 years, however, something had slowly changed. Victoria started staying at the office later than usual. 12-hour workdays became normal. Business dinners happened almost every week. Weekend conferences became frequent, and international meetings often interrupted our evenings together. Whenever I asked if everything was all right, she always smiled, kissed my forehead, and reminded me that leading a company came with enormous responsibility. I believed every word because trust had never been something I questioned. That Thursday morning felt completely ordinary. Victoria rushed through breakfast while answering emails on her phone. She barely touched the toast I had made before grabbing her laptop bag and heading toward the front door. I handed her a travel mug filled with fresh coffee, but her phone rang before she could take it. She looked at the screen, sighed and smiled apologetically. Looks like another emergency. I will grab coffee at the office. She kissed my cheek, thanked me for breakfast, and hurried outside before I could say another word. I stood in the doorway watching her drive away, feeling a little disappointed, but mostly concerned. She had looked exhausted lately. The pressure of leading hundreds of employees seemed to be draining every ounce of energy she had left. Around noon, while making myself lunch, I noticed the sandwich I had originally prepared for her still sitting inside the refrigerator. An idea suddenly crossed my mind. Why not surprise her? It had been years since I had visited her office. She always preferred keeping work separate from home, and I respected that boundary. Still, bringing her favorite vanilla latte and a fresh homemade sandwich felt like a thoughtful gesture she would appreciate. I packed everything carefully into a paper bag, drove downtown, and parked outside the massive glass tower where her company occupied the top 12 floors. The building looked every bit as impressive as Victoria often described. Polished marble floors reflected the afternoon sunlight, pouring through enormous windows. Employees hurried across the lobby wearing tailored suits, carrying laptops and coffee cups, while speaking confidently into wireless headsets. The entire atmosphere screamed success. Standing there with a paper lunch bag suddenly made me feel strangely out of place. I walked toward the security desk where a middle-aged guard wearing a neatly pressed uniform looked up from his computer with a polite smile. "Good afternoon, sir. How may I help you today?" I returned the smile and lifted the coffee slightly. "Hi, I'm here to surprise my wife. Her name is Victoria Carter. I am Daniel, her husband." For a second, the guard simply stared at me. His friendly smile slowly faded into an expression I could not understand. He tilted his head as though he had misheard me. "Excuse me, sir. Did you say you are Mrs. Carter's husband?" I laughed softly. "Yes, I know it sounds formal when I say it like that, but yes, I am her husband." The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds, yet somehow felt much longer. Then something happened that instantly filled me with uneasiness. The guard laughed. It was not a polite laugh. It was the confused laugh. Someone gives after hearing something. That makes absolutely no sense. I felt my stomach "Titan, I am sorry, sir," he finally said while trying to stop laughing. "But I see Mrs. Carter's husband almost every day." I blinked. I was certain I had misunderstood him. "I am sorry, what?" He casually pointed toward the elevators. Her husband was just here a little while ago. Before I could even process those words, the elevator doors slid open. A tall man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit stepped confidently into the lobby. He looked to be somewhere in his early 40s. Every detail about him radiated confidence. His expensive watch caught the light with every movement. His shoes looked brand new, and his posture carried the effortless authority of someone who belonged at the top of the corporate world. The guard smiled immediately. "Afternoon. Mr. Brooks." The man nodded naturally. "Afternoon, Mrs. Carter asked me to grab a few documents from the car. No problem. She is waiting upstairs." The conversation sounded completely routine, like they had repeated it dozens of times before. Then the guard looked back at me. "Sir, this is Mrs. Carter's husband." The world seemed to stop. I looked directly into the stranger's eyes. For one brief second, something flashed across his face. Recognition. He knew exactly who I was. Not surprise, not confusion, recognition. That single expression frightened me more than anything else. My pulse pounded so loudly I could barely hear the sounds around me. The coffee cup suddenly felt much heavier in my hands. The stranger recovered almost instantly. His smile returned professional, calm, completely controlled. "Is there a problem here?" His voice carried absolute confidence. The kind of confidence that only comes from someone who believes they are completely in control of the situation. Every instinct inside me screamed to shout the truth, to demand answers, to tell the guard that I had been married to Victoria for 28 years, but another voice inside my head stopped me. Years of working as an accountant had taught me something valuable. People reveal far more when they think you know nothing. So instead of reacting emotionally, I smiled. It was the hardest smile I had ever forced. "You must be Nathan Brooks," I said calmly. "Victoria has mentioned you before." His shoulders relaxed just slightly. "She mentioned you too. Interesting. She had mentioned me. But how? As what, a family friend? An old acquaintance? Or something even worse?" I handed him the paper bag. "Could you please give this to her? Tell her Daniel stopped by." For the first time, I noticed a tiny hesitation in his eyes. Only half a second, then it disappeared. Of course, I turned around without saying another word. Each step toward the exit felt heavier than the last. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped my keys. I sat behind the steering wheel for several minutes without starting the engine. Across the street, the towering office building looked exactly the same as it had 20 minutes earlier, but my entire world had changed. One sentence kept echoing inside my head. "I see her husband every day," and for the first time in 28 years, I was no longer sure who my wife really was. The truth begins to crack. I drove home without remembering a single traffic light I had passed. Somehow my hands kept the car between the lines, but my mind was miles away. The security guard's words replayed over and over until they almost lost their meaning. Every time I heard them in my head, they sounded even more impossible. I kept searching for a reasonable explanation. Maybe the guard was new. Maybe Nathan had been mistaken for someone's husband before. Maybe it was some ridiculous office joke that everyone understood except me. I desperately wanted any explanation that did not involve my wife living a life I knew nothing about. As I pulled into our driveway, I looked at the house that Victoria and I had built together nearly 20 years earlier. The flower garden she had insisted on planting still bloomed beside the front porch. Wind chimes gently swayed in the afternoon breeze. Family pictures decorated the living room windows, making the house look exactly like the peaceful home I believed it to be. Everything appeared perfectly normal, yet I suddenly felt like I was standing outside someone else's life. Inside, the silence felt different than it ever had before. Usually, I enjoyed the quiet while organizing client files or reading financial reports. That afternoon, every empty room seemed to whisper questions I could not answer. I placed my untouched lunch on the kitchen counter and stared at the wedding photo hanging above the fireplace. Victoria was smiling at me with the same joyful expression I had memorized almost 3 decades ago. Looking at that picture now, I could not stop wondering whether that smile had belonged to the woman I married or to someone I had only imagined. About an hour later, my phone vibrated. Running late tonight. Emergency board meeting. Love you. Normally that message would have made me smile. Instead, I read it 5 times. Love you. Those 2 words suddenly carried no comfort at all. They felt rehearsed, automatic, almost like something sent out of obligation instead of affection. For the first time in our marriage, I did not answer immediately. I simply locked the screen and placed the phone face down on the table. That evening, Victoria walked through the front door just after 9:30. She looked exactly as she always did after a long day. Her navy business suit was perfectly pressed, her blonde hair still neatly arranged, and despite the late hour, her makeup looked freshly touched up. She smiled warmly when she saw me sitting in the living room. There you are. She leaned down and kissed my forehead before setting her purse beside the sofa. Long day. I forced myself to smile. You could say that. She sighed while removing her jacket. Back-to-back meetings. I barely had time to breathe. My heart skipped on back-to-back meetings. Those were almost the exact words she had texted me earlier. I decided to test something. Stopped by your office today. She froze. It lasted less than a second. Most people would never have noticed. But after 28 years together, I knew every tiny change in her body language. She recovered immediately. Really? That was sweet. I brought you your favorite coffee. I smiled gently while watching her eyes. Nathan said he would give it to you. She looked at me for a moment longer than necessary. Then she laughed softly. Oh, that explains it. I wondered who sent it. I never had a chance to drink it. We were moving from one meeting to another all afternoon. Everything about her. Answer sounded perfectly reasonable, almost too reasonable. Not once did she ask why I had visited. Not once did she mention the awkward conversation downstairs. Not once did she seem surprised that I had met Nathan. Instead, she smoothly returned to discussing work as though nothing unusual had happened. The rest of the evening felt like a performance. We watched television together. She laughed at one of the jokes during a comedy commercial. We talked about grocery shopping for the weekend. She asked whether I had mailed the electric bill. Every conversation sounded exactly like every ordinary evening we had shared for years. Only now, every smile made me wonder whether I was watching my wife or an actress. That night, sleep refused to come. Victoria lay peacefully beside me, breathing slowly, as if she did not have a single worry in the world. I stared into the darkness, remembering hundreds of nights exactly like this one. How many times had she fallen asleep beside me after spending the day pretending another man was her husband? How many lies had I accepted without ever questioning them? When morning finally arrived, I made a decision. I would not accuse her, not yet. If something truly was happening, confronting her now would only give her time to hide it. I needed facts, real evidence, not emotions. After Victoria left for work, I called my assistant and cancelled every appointment for the day. Then I walked into our home office. For nearly 30 years, I had respected Victoria's privacy without hesitation, had never searched her belongings, never checked her phone, never questioned where she went. Trust had always been enough. Today, trust was gone. I started with her desk. Everything appeared ordinary. Company reports, meeting notes, business, magazines, nothing unusual. I almost convinced myself I had imagined everything until I opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a folded restaurant receipt. The restaurant's name immediately caught my attention. Lie. Misen. It was one of the most romantic restaurants in the Hue City. Victoria and I celebrated our 25th anniversary there. According to the receipt, 2 dinners had been purchased 6 weeks earlier. Bottle of expensive wine. Dessert for 2. No business expenses, no separate checks, just dinner for 2 people. That date instantly came back to me. Victoria had told me she was entertaining an important female client visiting from Seattle. She had even apologized for missing dinner at home. I remembered wishing her luck before she left. Now I stared at the receipt, wondering who had actually sat across from her that night. I carefully folded it and placed it in my pocket. For the first time, evidence had replaced suspicion, but deep inside, I feared the worst evidence was still waiting to be discovered. The restaurant receipt stayed in my pocket for the rest of the afternoon, feeling heavier than a piece of paper ever should have. I must have pulled it out a dozen times, studying the date and the total, as though the numbers might suddenly rearrange themselves into an innocent explanation. They never did. Every detail only strengthened the painful conclusion I was trying so desperately to avoid. For nearly 30 years, I had believed trust was the strongest foundation a marriage could have. I never imagined that trust could also become the perfect blindfold. While I was proudly telling friends how successful my wife had become, she had apparently learned that unquestioning trust made it remarkably easy to hide an entirely different life. Instead of letting my emotions take over, I did what I had always done whenever faced with uncertainty. I relied on facts. Numbers had never lied to me before, even if people sometimes did. I opened our online banking records and began reviewing every transaction from the previous 12 months. Normally, I only checked that our bills had been paid on time before moving on with my own work. This time I examined every charge one by one. At first, nothing stood out. Utility payments, insurance, groceries, charitable donations, and routine household expenses all appeared exactly where they should. Then a pattern slowly began to emerge. There were lunch charges on Tuesdays at restaurants nowhere near Victoria's office. There were fuel purchases in neighborhoods she never had any business visiting. There were boutique stores she had never mentioned shopping at, and parking garage fees from the opposite side of downtown. None of these expenses were large enough to raise suspicion individually, but together they painted a picture of someone traveling to places she had never told me about. I opened my calendar and compared dates with the credit card statements. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Every mysterious purchase happened on days Victoria claimed she was trapped in executive meetings or entertaining clients. Until that moment, I had accepted every explanation without question because I loved her. Now every explanation looked carefully rehearsed. Late that afternoon, my eyes landed on her laptop sitting on the kitchen island. She often brought work home, and she almost never let it leave her side. Today, however, she had rushed out so quickly that she forgot it completely. The screen had gone dark, but it had never locked itself. I stood there for nearly a minute arguing with myself. Looking through her computer, crossed a line I had promised never to cross. It felt like betraying the very values I had always believed defined me. Then I remembered another promise. The promise Victoria had made 28 years earlier, standing across from me in a small white church, promising honesty and faithfulness until death separated us. If she had abandoned that promise years ago, why was I still protecting it alone? My hands trembled as I opened the screen. An email application appeared immediately. Nothing unusual sat in the inbox, but a calendar notification popped into the corner of the display before disappearing. Again, dinner with N7. O'clock Bella Vista. My heartbeat instantly accelerated. Bella Vista was not just another restaurant, it was our restaurant. It was where I had celebrated my 50th birthday. It was where we toasted every anniversary after our children left home. It was where I believed some of our happiest memories had been created. Now another man was meeting my wife. There I clicked the calendar. My stomach dropped. This was not a single dinner. There were recurring appointments stretching back almost 2 years. Tuesday breakfast, Thursday dinner, Saturday planning, weekend retreat, coffee with N private, dinner. Every event appeared carefully labeled, just enough for Victoria to recognize, while revealing almost nothing to anyone else. There was no mention of clients or board meetings attached to most of them. They were personal appointments disguised behind simple titles. Then I noticed something else. Entire weekends had disappeared, 3 months earlier. Victoria told me she was attending a women's leadership conference in Chicago. I remembered helping her pack. I remembered driving her to the airport before sunrise. The calendar entry told a completely different story. Weekend escape, no location, just her initials, and Nathan's. A cold feeling spread through my chest. This was no longer an affair. That had developed unexpectedly. This was a second relationship, one planned with military precision. Leaned back in the chair, trying to slow my breathing. Everything I believed about my marriage had collapsed in less than 24 hours. The woman I kissed goodbye every morning had been scheduling another life. While I organized tax returns and planned weekend grocery trips, my eyes wandered. Back to the email application. There were hundreds of business messages, but one folder immediately caught my attention. Archive inside sat dozens of conversations between Victoria and Nathan. Most had been deleted, leaving only fragments. One message remained. Looking forward to tonight finally feels like home when we are together. I stared at those words until they blurred. Home, not excitement, not romance, home. That single word hurt, more than every other discovery combined, because home had always been what I believed we shared. Apparently, she had been calling somewhere else home for a very long time. The sound of the garage door suddenly echoed. Through the house, my heart nearly stopped. Victoria was home. I closed the laptop so quickly I almost knocked. Hit off the counter. A few seconds later, she walked into the kitchen carrying her purse, smiling exactly the same way she always had. "You are still working?" She kissed my cheek before reaching into the refrigerator. "Actually, I finished early today. Maybe we should go out tonight." Her voice sounded warm, almost excited. For one impossible second, hope returned. Maybe she wanted to reconnect. Maybe she had realized we had drifted apart, maybe. Then she reached into her purse as her phone vibrated. Her smile faded. She quickly typed a reply before looking back at me. "Oh no, I completely forgot Tokyo conference call. It starts at 7:30. I am so sorry. Can we do dinner another night?" I already knew the answer before she spoke. 7 o'clock. Bella Vista dinner with Nathan. The conference call never existed. It was simply another lie added to a list that had grown far longer than I ever imagined. Forced another smile. Of course, work comes first. She walked upstairs to change clothes while I remained standing in the kitchen. A few minutes later, she came back, wearing an elegant black dress I had bought her for our anniversary. She had told me it was too beautiful to wear to the office. Apparently, it was not too beautiful for another man. She leaned over, kissed my cheek one more time, and smiled with the same gentle warmth that had once made me feel like the luckiest husband. "Life, do not wait up. I love you." Then she walked out the front door. I stood frozen until I heard her car disappear down the street. Exactly 15 minutes later, I picked up my keys. Tonight, for the first time in 28 years, I was going to follow my own wife. The entire drive across town felt unreal. I stayed several cars behind Victoria, careful not to attract attention. Every turn she made took us farther away from the business district and farther away from every explanation I had been desperately holding on to. Part of me still hoped she would pull into another office building or meet clients at a restaurant. I wanted to feel foolish for doubting her. Instead, 40 minutes later, she turned into the parking lot of an upscale apartment complex overlooking the river. The sign at the entrance read, "Harbor Point Residences." I had never been there before. Victoria slowed beside the security gate, entered a code without hesitation, and drove inside. She knew the code. She did not stop to ask anyone for directions. She was not visiting, she belonged there. I parked across the street where I could still see the entrance without being noticed. My pulse pounded as I watched her step out of the car. She looked different, not physically, emotionally. The exhausted executive who had supposedly spent 12 hours in meetings was gone. Instead, she looked relaxed, happy, almost relieved. She checked her reflection in the side mirror, smiled to herself, and walked toward Building CA. Few moments later, another familiar vehicle entered the parking lot, a black Mercedes. Nathan, he, parked beside Victoria's BMW as though they had done it 100 times before. He climbed out carrying 2 grocery bags and a bottle of wine. He wasn't dressed like a businessman anymore. He looked like a man coming home after work. Victoria met him halfway across the parking lot. Then I watched something I will never forget for the rest of my life. She smiled at him with a warmth I had not seen in years, not the polite smile she gave co-workers, not the tired smile she gave me after long work days. This smile reached her eyes. Nathan wrapped one arm around her waist. Without hesitation, she kissed him. Not a quick greeting, not an awkward mistake. A long, comfortable kiss shared by two people completely at ease with each other. I felt every bit of strength leave my body. 28 years. 28 years of marriage collapsed into silence as I watched another man hold my wife like she belonged to him. The hardest part was not the kiss. It was how natural it looked. There was no fear, no nervousness, no urgency, only familiarity. As if they had repeated this same routine every evening for years. They disappeared inside the building together. I sat frozen behind my steering wheel. I should have driven away. Any sane person would have. Instead, I remained there for nearly an hour, unable to move. Questions filled my mind faster than I could answer them. How long? Who knew? Had our friends suspected? Had my family noticed signs I ignored? Most importantly, who exactly had my wife become? Just as I was about to leave, something unexpected happened. A maintenance employee exited Building C carrying a cart filled with tools. The security gate remained propped open while he moved equipment between buildings. Without thinking, I stepped out of my car. Every instinct told me to stop. Every instinct told me I had already seen enough. But I needed the truth, not pieces of it, all of it. I walked calmly through the open gate. Nobody questioned me. Nobody even looked in my direction. Inside the lobby, I noticed a row of apartment numbers beside the elevators. I remembered where Victoria and Nathan had disappeared. Second floor. Apartment 214. My heart pounded as I climbed the stairs instead of taking the elevator. Each step felt heavier than the last. When I reached the second floor, I stopped outside apartment 214. Voices drifted faintly through the door. Laughter, soft music, plates clinking together. It sounded normal, like any married couple preparing dinner after work. My stomach twisted. I reached toward the doorknob before quickly pulling my hand back. What was I expecting? To walk inside? To ask why another version of my wife existed behind this door? Before I could decide what to do, the apartment door opened unexpectedly. I quickly stepped around the corner. Nathan walked into the hallway carrying a trash bag. He headed toward the garbage chute without noticing me. The apartment door remained slightly open. For just a few seconds, that was all it took. I looked inside. The living room was beautifully furnished. A gray sectional couch, fresh flowers, bookshelves, family photographs. Then I noticed something that made my knees weak. One photograph sat prominently above the fireplace. Victoria and Nathan standing together on a beach. She was laughing. His arm rested comfortably around her shoulders. There was no wedding ring on her finger. They looked like newlyweds, not co-workers, not secret lovers. A real couple. Nathan returned before I could see anything else. I quietly moved farther down the hallway until he went back inside. The apartment door closed. I remained there another minute before forcing myself to leave. The drive home felt longer than any journey I had ever taken. This time there were no comforting possibilities left, no misunderstandings, no innocent explanations. I had seen enough with my own eyes. My wife was not simply having an affair. She was living another life, another home, another relationship, another future. And somehow I had never noticed. When I arrived home, everything inside the house looked painfully familiar. The family portraits, our wedding album, the anniversary gifts displayed on shelves. Every object represented memories I had treasured for decades. Now each one carried a painful question. Were those memories ever as real as I believed, or had I simply been living inside the version of life she wanted me to see? Around 10:30, the front door opened. Victoria walked inside carrying her laptop bag. She smiled exactly the same way she always did. "Sorry I'm so late. The conference call ran forever." She leaned over and kissed my cheek. I could still smell Nathan's expensive cologne mixed with her perfume. It took everything inside me not to pull away. Instead, I smiled. "How did it go?" She sighed dramatically. "The Tokyo team finally approved the proposal." Worth the long night, though, another lie, delivered effortlessly. She moved into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. Then she looked back at me. "You have been awfully quiet lately. Everything okay?" I almost laughed. She was asking whether I was okay, after spending the evening building a future with another man, after kissing him in the parking lot, after eating dinner in the apartment they clearly shared. I nodded slowly. "Just tired." She walked over, wrapped her arms around me for a brief moment, and rested her head against my shoulder. "I love you." 3 simple words. Words that once meant everything. Now they felt completely empty. She had become so comfortable living 2 separate lives that she could switch between them without missing a beat. One life belonged to Nathan, the other belonged to me. Except mine was never real. That night I lay awake beside her once again, only this time, something inside me had changed forever. I was no longer searching for explanations. I was no longer hoping to save my marriage. I wanted answers, every single one of them, and I was prepared to uncover every secret she had buried, no matter how painful the truth became. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Victoria smiling at Nathan in that parking lot. It was not just the kiss that haunted me. It was the look on her face. I had spent nearly 3 decades trying to make that woman happy. Yet I could not remember the last time she had looked at me with that kind of joy. Somehow another man had become the center of a life I never even knew existed. By sunrise, I had stopped asking whether my marriage could be saved. Instead, I started asking a much more important question. How much had she hidden from me? The following morning, Victoria left for work just as she always did. She kissed my cheek, wished me a good day, and reminded me not to forget dinner with my brother the following weekend. Listening to her casually plan our future while secretly living another one was almost unbearable. The moment her car disappeared down the street, I drove back to Harbor Point. This time I was not following anyone. I was looking for answers. I parked several buildings away and waited. Nearly 2 hours passed before I finally saw Nathan leave the apartment carrying a laptop bag. He locked the door, climbed into his Mercedes, and drove away. My heart raced. This was my chance. I walked toward Building C, trying to appear as confident as every resident around me. The hallway was quiet. Apartment 214 stood exactly where I remembered. I stared at the door for several seconds. Then something unbelievable happened. The maintenance worker I had seen the previous evening stepped into the hallway carrying cleaning supplies. "Morning," he smiled politely. "Morning." I returned the greeting, trying to remain calm. "You here for Mrs. Carter?" The question almost knocked the air out of my lungs. I forced myself to nod. "Yeah, she asked me to stop by." He smiled. She must have forgotten her spare key again. Without another word, he reached into his pocket, unlocked the apartment door, and continued down the hallway. I stood frozen. The door remained slightly open. My entire body screamed at me to walk away. Instead, I stepped inside. The apartment was silent. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. Everything inside looked permanent. Nothing about it resembled a place for secret meetings. Fresh flowers decorated the dining table. Victoria's favorite scented candles sat beside the television. A soft gray blanket was folded neatly across the couch. Someone actually lived here. Then I noticed the photographs. Dozens of them. Nathan and Victoria hiking together. Nathan and Victoria at a beach resort. Nathan and Victoria celebrating Christmas. Nathan and Victoria standing in front of a mountain cabin with matching winter jackets. There was even a framed picture of them carving pumpkins together for Halloween. I stood there unable to breathe. Those holidays, those vacations. She had told me she was attending executive retreats, business conferences, leadership seminars. She had never been working. She had been building memories with another man. I slowly walked deeper into the apartment. The bedroom door stood partially open. Inside, 2 wardrobes shared the same wall. Half contained Nathan clothes. The other half belonged to Victoria. Her dresses, her shoes, her perfume, even the blue sweater I gave her for our anniversary hung neatly beside Nathan's jackets. The bathroom felt even worse. 2 toothbrushes, 2 electric razors, her makeup. his cologne, matching bathrobes hanging beside each other. It was not an affair. It was a marriage, just not the one I believed she was living. My hands trembled as I entered the home office. A laptop sat closed on the desk. Beside it rested a thick folder labeled simply, Future. I hesitated, then opened it. The first page showed architectural drawings for a luxury home. Across the top, someone had written, Dream House, Nathan Brooks, Victoria Carter. Below the drawing were handwritten notes discussing furniture, renovations, and estimated moving dates. My stomach tightened. They were not dreaming. They were planning. The next pages were even worse. Vacation itineraries, wedding venue brochures, investment accounts, retirement plans. Everything organized months in advance. Then I reached the final section. A legal folder. My heartbeat became painfully loud. Across the front were two words, divorce strategy. I slowly opened it. Every page felt like another knife. Consultation summaries, attorney notes, financial projections, asset division estimates, everything carefully organized. Then I found the page that completely shattered me. Client preparation timeline. Month 1. Continue presenting stable marriage publicly. Month 2. Document emotional distance. Month 3. File for divorce citing incompatibility. Month 4. Transition into public relationship with Nathan. There it was, written plainly in black ink. My replacement, scheduled on a calendar. I kept reading. One paragraph caught my attention immediately. Maintain normal household routines until legal preparation is complete. Avoid confrontation before filing. Reduce suspicion through consistent affection. I stared at those words for what felt like forever. Reduce suspicion through consistent affection. Every kiss, every hug, every message saying love you, every smile, every anniversary celebration, every holiday, every one of them had become part of a strategy. Not love, a strategy. My vision blurred. For the first time since all of this began, I cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just silently. Standing alone inside the apartment where another version of my wife had been living. 28 years, reduced to paperwork. Eventually I wiped my face and forced myself to keep reading. There was one final document. It listed every asset Victoria believed she would receive after divorcing me. Our home, our retirement savings, investment accounts, vacation property. Even my accounting business had been assigned an estimated market value. She had already divided our lives. Before ever telling me our marriage was over, I carefully removed my phone from my pocket. For the next 20 minutes, I photographed everything. Every page, every photograph, every document, every calendar, every piece of evidence. Not because I wanted revenge, because I finally understood something. The woman I loved had been preparing for this moment long before I knew it existed. If I walked away without proof, she would write the ending exactly the way she wanted. And I refused to let that happen. As I prepared to leave, my eyes landed on one final picture sitting beside the bedroom window. It showed Victoria and Nathan smiling at each other while holding champagne glasses. Across the bottom, written in silver ink, "Our forever begins soon." I stared at those 4 words, then quietly placed the picture back exactly where I found it. Without another sound, I walked out of apartment 214. As I reached my car, I no longer felt confused. I no longer felt lost. For 3 days, I had been chasing answers. Now I finally had them. My marriage had not fallen apart overnight. It had been dismantled piece by piece while I continued loving someone who had already chosen another future. I started the engine, not to run away, but to prepare for the battle that was coming. Because the next conversation with Victoria would not be between a trusting husband, it would be between 2 people who finally knew the truth.